This is the MacBook Neo, and at $600, it is a very different kind of Mac. The dominant story in the tech world the last few months has been the RAM crisis. AI data centers have pushed prices sky high, and PC manufacturers are either charging more, cutting corners, or both. So then how is it that Apple, the company that charges you a small fortune to upgrade your MacBook, comes out of nowhere to release this, a $600 laptop that on the surface looks kind of incredible? Oh, and if you're a student, this is available for just $500. So, what is the MacBook Neo? Well, it's powered by the A18 Pro, the same chip from last year's iPhone 16 Pro. With that, you get 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, and a 13-inch Retina display at $599. Bump up to $699, and you double the storage to 512 gigs, as well as you get Touch ID. That is it. Those are your only two options outside of which colorway you pick. So what is it like to actually use Apple's cheapest MacBook, well, ever? So one of my big questions with the Neo is what do they have to cut to hit this price point? $600 is not a lot of money for a MacBook. And the answer is, there are cuts, but I don't think they're actually too bad. So spending some time with the Neo, there are a few things that jump out to me. And one of the pleasant surprises is the touchpad. So it is not a force touch clickpad. Instead, it is a physically moving touchpad, and it actually feels, first impressions, but maybe better than a force pad because there's an actual physical click. The keyboard feels maybe a touch shallower. That could just be placebo, but what it is that it is not backlit. So that is one of the only downsides really going with this over something like a MacBook Air when it comes to like the inputs. The speakers are fairly decent. So obviously I'm in an event venue, but the speakers sound pretty good, so they're sort of side firing, but you do actually see the sort of slits where the speakers are. Now, there are some other cutbacks I've noticed. The webcam is just fine, passable, but nothing more than that. There's some slightly odd things that are missing. It does have two USB-C ports, no MagSafe, but they're not created equal. So the front port is USB 3 and also supports display out. The other is USB 2. So essentially, you can think of that one as essentially your charging port or maybe plugging in something like a keyboard. Although thankfully it does keep the headphone jack. The screen's a little bit smaller. In fact, the entire laptop is smaller than something like the 13-inch MacBook Air. I personally kind of like that. I feel like we're living in a bizarro world where we've got legitimately some of the better value products right now coming from Apple. Assuming that there's not some massive catch that for some reason I have not noticed yet. I mean, at first glance, it seems like an incredibly compelling value. You know, it's funny. Back in the early days of the channel, I bought an iBook G4. Now, it was nowhere near powerful enough to edit, but it was all I could afford at the time. Now, fast forward a few years, and I spent like $1,000 on an 11-inch MacBook Air, which did turn out to be my workhorse for years. But man, if the Neo existed back then, it would have been an absolute no-brainer for me. Now, I should be clear. If you're watching this video, odds are you're an enthusiast, and this laptop probably isn't for you. That's kind of the point. The Neo isn't trying to impress us. It's trying to be the best laptop for the millions of people who just need something that works and doesn't cost a fortune. But surely, at $600, you're dealing with some serious compromises though, right? The MacBook Neo does not exist in a vacuum. How does it stack up with this, the Lenovo IdeaPad Slim 3X? I've chosen this because it actually recently won a competition we did with a number of $500 and less Windows laptops. I'll say I actually like this Lenovo quite a bit, but when you put it side by side with the Neo, the first thing that really jumps out to you is the build quality. While there is some aluminum in this construction, it's largely plastic and it shows. I mean, it doesn't feel particularly premium, and that's one of the major selling points of the Neo. This is entirely made out of aluminum, and it feels almost identical to a laptop that costs twice as much. There's no flex, there's no anything. I mean, it feels like it is designed to last the long haul, and I'll be honest, MacBooks generally do. So the Neo has a brighter, a higher resolution, and a much more color accurate display, especially when you're looking at the viewing angle. It's not even close. I will say I do prefer the keyboard on the Lenovo. Not only does it have more travel, but importantly it's backlit, something that the MacBook is not. A clear win for the MacBook is with the touchpad. So the Lenovo, it has a traditional diving board mechanism, which means it clicks on the bottom but not on the top. Whereas the MacBook, you can click it anywhere, any of the four corners. And it actually is really nice because it uses what's known as a dual flexure design. But essentially when you click on one side, the entire thing depresses. Even though technically this is a downgrade from the Force Touch trackpad on the higher end MacBooks, I almost kind of prefer the way this one feels. Let's do a little sound comparison, my friends. All right, so the build quality, the screen, the speakers, the trackpad, I mean, it's not really close. The Neo, it just feels like a MacBook. The IdeaPad feels like, well, $500 laptop. A nice $500 laptop, but still. But here's the interesting thing though. If you just looked at the benchmarks, you'd actually think that the IdeaPad is the better machine. In multi-core performance, the Snapdragon X inside the IdeaPad actually beats out the Neo. And the SSD in the IdeaPad is over 3 times faster on reads. I was legitimately surprised by that one. This is a really fast SSD. There's also the fact that the IdeaPad has 16 gigs of RAM, something that I do wish was available on the Neo. But in single core, which is really what matters for most of the stuff you do on a $600 laptop. So think about like opening apps, browsing, just general snappiness. The A18 Pro is way ahead of the Snapdragon X. It's that massive gap in the perceived feel that makes the Neo just straight up feel like a much quicker laptop. Now, I want to be fair here. The IdeaPad runs Windows, which depending on your use case is either a big deal or a major downside. And I think this is a big reason why Apple have brought the Neo out, bringing you into the ecosystem. If you look at their promo video, the Neo is all about working seamlessly with your iPhone, with your AirPods, with iCloud. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like this is a huge reason why they built this, to bring a new generation into the wonderful world of Apple products. Now, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but I think that the Neo makes a lot of sense if you look at the bigger picture. You know, when I was getting my briefing on the Neo, the big thing I kept thinking was, a cheap MacBook isn't actually new. Ever since 2024, Apple has sold this, the M1 MacBook Air. Now this originally came out in 2020, and while it was discontinued a few years ago on the Apple Store, they kept it around at Walmart for $700 and on sale for as little as $600 to $650 right up until very recently. It's got a lot of the same specs too, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage. As we'll talk about in a second, the M1 chip is in the same ballpark as the A18 Pro and the Neo. And especially if you look at the used market, these things are killer. Just a month or so ago, I picked one up for $260 for a video, and I am totally sold that it is 100% usable today. I truly think that the M1 Air is going to go down as one of the greatest laptops Apple have ever had. So does the Neo actually replace it? Well, it's complicated. So let's start with where the Neo wins, single core performance. Just like with the Lenovo, it is a lot higher than the already powerful M1 Air, and for everyday tasks, the Neo does genuinely feel snappier. It's also slightly smaller and lighter, it has a little bit faster Wi-Fi 6E, and most importantly, it's 5 years newer, which should give it a lot more software support in the future. But here's where it gets complicated. The M1 Air's SSD is nearly twice as fast as the Neo. Now the reason that's important here is that both of these laptops only have 8 gigs of RAM. That's very usable in macOS, but when you push past that 8 gigs, which you will almost certainly do as soon as you open a few Chrome tabs, macOS uses the SSD as overflow, what's called swap memory. And this is where I ran into something interesting. Under normal use, so browsing, a few apps open, the Neo handles the 8 gigs of RAM just like the Air with absolutely no problem. But last night, I was doing some archiving, which is a fairly heavy workload. I was downloading, unzipping, and transferring hundreds of gigs of data to an external drive. Now, as soon as the SSD gets saturated, the system does slow down. Now, it typically only pauses for a second or two, while macOS quickly swaps data from the SSD back to RAM, but for serious multitasking, you can slow the Neo down. Now, to be very fair, this is not a normal use case for a $600 laptop. For what people do 99% of the time, this thing will absolutely hold up. But when you really tax it, it does feel like that slower SSD can cause some problems compared to the M1 Air. There are some other advantages to the Air. So it has a backlit keyboard, although I do kind of prefer the trackpad on the Neo. And the Air does have 2 full Thunderbolt 3 ports instead of the USB 3 and the slow USB 2 on the Neo. And of course, if you compare this to a current MacBook Air, that also adds MagSafe, something that is completely missing on the Neo. So after using the Neo for almost a week, I keep coming back to something really simple. The experience is basically identical to a MacBook Air, just at $400 or $500 less. Now, if you step outside of benchmark land, the performance has been terrific for everyday use. And the screen, while it's missing the P3 color gamut and True Tone, honestly, you would never notice. It's really nice. It also lacks the notch, which I actually appreciate. It gives you a little bit more room in the menu bar. I feel like the notch always looked weird on the Air and the Pro. Now, for battery life, I've been averaging around 8 to 9 hours, which I think is genuinely pretty good. I mean, sure, it's a step down from the Air, but for $600, I mean, come on. Now, if you go looking for compromises, you will find them. But here's the thing. Every one of those compromises is tough to argue with at $600 or even $700. None of them make me want to go out and tell someone not to buy this laptop, which kind of got me thinking about the bigger picture. Apple are absolutely massive. They're able to get great deals, they're able to command margins, and most importantly, they have the scale to pull something like the Neo off. The reason why the Neo is able to be $600 and still profitable for them is the fact that they are making so many of the components, such as the chip inside. That really is the key to all of this. The A18 Pro was built at massive scale for the iPhone, and it probably cost Apple next to nothing to put in a laptop compared to what PC manufacturers are paying AMD, Intel, or Qualcomm for the chips. They build macOS so they can optimize for 8 gigs of RAM in ways that Windows just can't match. During my briefing, Apple reps were very proud of how much effort they put into making the Neo happen, and I believe them. But I also think they could have done this earlier. The A17 Pro had 8 gigs of RAM back in 2024, and it would have worked just as well for a Neo back then. What I think changed isn't the technology, it's the strategy. Apple's pushing the lineup in two directions at the same time. The Neo and the iPhone 17e at $600 are laser targeted at bringing new users to the Apple ecosystem. You've also got the Mac Mini at $600, which is a serious value, especially now that everyone's obsessed with running OpenClaw on it. Even the base iPad at $350 has had this playbook figured out for years. And on the higher end, I think they're about to start pushing as well. The rumors are pointing toward a potential MacBook Ultra coming later this year, and if you pair that with the foldable iPhone that's almost certainly going to be more expensive, it paints a very real picture for me. And having a product at almost every price point really helps to feed the ecosystem where Apple makes money on services for years. We recently discussed this in a video, but while in the past Apple relied almost entirely on hardware for their profit, more and more lately they're making money from the App Store, from iCloud. I mean, there's just a huge amount of value in bringing more people into the Apple ecosystem. It's just smart. And I think that the RAM crisis has made it even more effective, because while everyone else is raising prices and cutting corners, Apple has the vertical integration to go the other direction. Look, the MacBook Neo is not perfect. 8 gigs of RAM with no upgrade path is going to limit things in the future. The SSD is slower than I'd like. No backlit keyboard, limited ports, a smaller battery. But for almost anyone who's considering the MacBook Air before this, it's hard to justify not buying a Neo. $600 to $700 before discounts for a laptop that looks and feels like a product twice the price? Look, it's really simple. The MacBook Neo is my new default recommendation to almost anyone who's looking for a sub $1,000 laptop, unless you specifically need Windows or some serious gaming performance. In a year where tech is getting incredibly expensive, somehow it's Apple who are delivering some of the best value out there. If you'll excuse me, I need to step outside. I think hell may have frozen over. But you know what hasn't frozen over? Subscribing to the Austin Evans channel and ring-a-linging that ding-a-ling button. If you want to learn more about why things are so expensive, we did an entire video all about the RAM crisis, as well as we've also covered a bunch of other budget Windows laptops if you want to see what the Neo's going up against. Although I will say that that video might just need a little bit of an update now.